Well, thank you everyone for joining us for the Dartmouth School Committee Budget Subcommittee meeting, our first one of the fiscal year 23 calendar. So we are having a remote meeting today here, obviously on Zoom, but it is also being broadcast live on DHS TV media channel on YouTube. So just wanted to fill you in on that. So we're looking forward to working with you all on this FY23 budget. This is, we're still in the preparation phase of this budget, sort of the planning phase. We will be bringing forward a budget presentation for the school committee next week. So this is an important part of the process where we can hopefully start to build some support from you folks and you know, get ready for sort of the next stage of moving forward with this. So with that, I will share my screen and get started with the presentation. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to chime in at any time. We have a pretty small group here in the Zoom meeting, so feel free to just interrupt me and we can talk about things, but we'll have time for questions at the end as well. So. All right, so we have a consistent mission, vision, and budget goals that we've had for some years here in Dartmouth. As you probably know, our mission is to provide a quality education for all learners. And our budget goal really is to make sure that our funding is strategically allocated to support the mission and vision. So to support the district improvement plan, the school improvement plans, and really to focus on providing a quality education for everyone here. So we're still early in this list, but there's actually been a lot of work that's gone in to get us to this point. Schools and departments back prior to the holidays, prepared budget proposals that they submitted to us. They are focused on their school improvement plans and on student achievement and really looking at data to support their requests. They've submitted some very thoughtful proposals. We'll go through a little bit some of the proposals in a minute. At the same time that they're doing all that work, I am preparing projections for all sorts of budget areas. So staffing, transportation, utility projections, lots of moving parts, substitutes, just every little piece of what it takes to run this fairly large operation. We're doing at that same time. And then we begin to meet, talk about evaluating proposals and trying to come up with a district-wide plan to move that forward. And that's sort of what we've done to date. Today is the first time we're actually going to be speaking publicly about the budget. So that's opening the lines of communication with the school committee, with our finance committee representative, and hopefully gathering some support for what looks to be, a somewhat challenging budget year. Where our hope is that from here we're able to expand that support and get support from the school committee and ultimately the other boards in town, the finance committee, select board, and so forth, and get what we need to support kids. So there's some things that play a large role in this budget, and we'll look at the numbers in a minute. But we will be in bargaining with all 7 of our collective bargaining groups this year. all the contracts expire either June 30th or August 31st of this year. So there's a lot of uncertainty revolving around that. In the meantime, there are things that we know about those contracts. So there are increases, there are salary schedules that have steps built in, and other benefits that are tied to those that we do know. So we build all those in. We factor in savings from retirements, and then at this point, we have 10 of those this year, which is kind of on the low side for us. Some of the retirements are not particularly big savings type positions. Sometimes our retirements are spots where we can, focus on trying to save some money to reallocate. That's not really the case this year. We have some increases as we do every year with special ed tuition. The state sets out of district rates for statewide for all of the schools that we send students to. That usually is an increase of between 3% and 5%. So if you think about our typical budget in past years, well, it's actually typically gone up less than what that particular area has increased. We've built in about $100,000 increase to cover that. Transportation, we've got some really good news in that this is our final year of FY23 will be our final year of our regular bus contract. That means there's no increase this year, which is a big help budget-wise. Our special ed contract is expiring. It's not been a great year for bus companies. Transportation has been an issue. Staffing, major problem. The minimum wage increase has caused sort of competition amongst, for employees, and we've definitely felt effects of that. And the pandemic clearly hasn't helped either. So we built in just under $100,000 projected increase for that, and we're hoping that will be sufficient. Enrollment in FY23, slight decrease from FY22. Not quite sure whether some of that could be pandemic related too. We might see some people returning that made a different choice with their kids in this school year. So town, state, federal stuff. This is a fairly bleak area of the projections. The town, I don't have a firm projection as to where we are for the town yet, and I'm not surprised by that. Certainly don't blame them for that. There's a lot of moving parts right now, and they have a lot of uncertainty in terms of funding from the state and other sources. So that is sort of to be determined. That'll be coming, but not quite yet. State and federal funding. So Chapter 70, which is the biggest funding source that the town receives, that is education aid from the state. They have, the governor's proposal was for a 1% increase for Dartmouth in Chapter 70 funding. It's $100,000. We get about $10 million in Chapter 70 funding. So that $100,000 increase, 1%. So it is an increase, but basically it's a step backwards when we're looking at inflation and wage increases and everything else. I wish I could say I'm surprised, but at this point, I am definitely not surprised by that. But it is unfortunate. The legislature hasn't done anything with it yet. They will be, as we move through this process, the different committees will act on it, and I'll keep you posted. I don't have a lot of hope, though, that that's going to be significantly different. Federal funding, though, I don't know where all the money's coming from, but they definitely, they're still seem to be maintaining I think the grant funding will be maintained. They've committed all the funds for ESSER, which is the COVID relief monies. So we know that what that is, so we can plan on that. So that's actually kind of a nice one to be able to count on. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward through the presentation. So health insurance, we got, I guess what I would say is fairly good news in that the average increase of the Maya Health Group, which is what we participate in, excuse me, is 3.7%. So the town received that notice, has not yet received notice on how much Dartmouth's increase is going to be, but the average increase is 3.7. So last year, Dartmouth was below the average, and that was a big step. And that is based on the experience rating of the town. Dartmouth has historically been above the average. So it was great that that we saw sort of a turnaround in health in the community, hoping that that happens again and the increase is below 3.7%. They did say that the low increase is 0. So some community had no increase. I'm hoping it's us. Some community had a 7.5% increase. So obviously that can't be Dartmouth. So Greater New Bedford Voc, they have the minimum required Dartmouth contribution is up 8%. So that's $418,000. That's pretty significant. So that's something that the town's going to have to, obviously isn't in our control and doesn't have anything to do with what I'm presenting today in terms of the budget, but it is something that the town needs to incorporate and consider as they move forward through this process. And Bristol Aggie is up 47%, 124,000. And that's basically, it appears that there's 8 more students next year at Bristol Aggie than before. So it definitely is another amount that the town needs to factor in.
So, Mr. Kiley, I know you're just the facts ma'am here, but I'll make the political commentary. And I know it doesn't quote unquote affect our budget, but it does, because it affects how much money is available in the town. And we talked about this when our voc representatives came to see us, and it's hard, right? I mean, those numbers that we're talking about for voc and Aggie are, several positions in our district, right? I mean, or things that the town can't do. And I do think it's time to sort of think about as a community how we can smooth out some of these bumps, because $418,000 is a not insubstantial amount of money.
Right. Oh, I agree. It's 8%. So an 8% increase is, obviously we're not talking about increases anywhere near that level. So, if there's only one pool of funds, how do you split that up? Who pays for that? I don't know. But it's certainly a concern, and that's why I thought it was important to note on this. So I won't walk through every single proposal, because the next 3 slides have valuable proposals that could help kids in the Dartmouth Public Schools. So I'll start by saying, sort of at the top 2 lines of numbers on this slide, what they show is the FY22 budget. That's the year we're in. Our budget is currently $47,180,548.82. Okay. Now the FY23 draft budget. So that is sort of our preliminary budget before considering all of the requests from the schools and the departments, all of these things in this list down below. So basically what that number represents is all of the projections that I talked about doing, all of the key factors that we talked about, the special ed increase in tuition, the transportation increase, the all of those factors, obviously building in salary, contractual obligations are built into that. And our starting point is at $49,173,115.93. So a 4.22% increase. Now, so that is salary. Staffing is more than 70% of our budget. So obviously that is significant. And those other areas where there is some increase, relatively minor increase in utilities also built into there. Fortunately, the town has locked in some pretty favorable contracts, because if they hadn't, the utilities would be a problem as well. So that's sort of our starting point at 4.22. And you'll see we have a lot of really, a lot of proposals here. And as we go through this process, I can share more detail if you have questions about specific proposals. But a lot of proposals for staff that can help kids. Some proposals for supplies. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And I'm just going to page through this a little, but most of the major proposals on this list are staffing related. So the left-hand column of numbers. So that, if you look at the bottom, the total of all of those proposals is $969,000, so just under $1 million. It would represent about a 2% increase in our budget. So as I said, we started at about just over 4%, 4.2%. That would get us to 6.2%. If we were to incorporate all those proposals. That's $50 million for our budget at that point. Now, obviously, we have to, we understand that we have to do our due diligence and try and come up with a budget proposal that accomplishes at least what we hope to accomplish in terms of providing what schools, what students need, but also be reasonable and responsible in that proposal. As a result, the right-hand column of numbers are what we've actually built in at this point. So there are a few things on that list that we have incorporated into the budget. And there are some on this list that we haven't incorporated in the right-hand column, but we do acknowledge that they need to exist and that we need to figure out an alternative way to fund them. So one thing that was sort of a common theme amongst the schools is inflationary factors on and supply chain issues for ordering things. It's real. As we all know, I think in our personal lives, there's no way around it. It's a reality. I don't know how long it's going to go on. I'm hoping that things come back to normal, but that may not, that may not be for some time. So what we are committed to doing is using about $62,000. Our proposal would be to use about $62,000 of school choice funding to buffer costs of inflation and supply chain and supply issues. So I have specific items on this list that we know have to happen. We're going to make them happen. Our hope is that the school committee would support our using school choice funding to support that. I believe that it's a good use of school choice funding. I don't know whether prices are ever going to come back down, so I don't really know whether it's one-time expenses or not. But at this point, I think the best thing we can do is attempt to incorporate those things that way. If in fact this is the new reality and the new normal moving forward, that costs are higher, then at some point we're going to have to come back and try and build them into the operating budget. But at this point, I really think that we'll hopefully try and approach it that way to lessen the actual need to increase the operating budget even more than it already is here. Like using school choice funding, we're also going to use ESSER funding to support some of these requests. So ESSER, again, is the Coronavirus Relief Fund. There's multiple grants involved, and it's over a course of several years, and they couldn't have really made it any more complicated than they did. But the good news is there is money, and we are currently using it to support kids right now with staffing and expenses and our after school programs that we've initiated. And so our hope is that we will be using approximately $75,000 of ESSER funding to support things on this list. So that being said, there are a lot of things on this list that we haven't built in. So even if we're talking about 217,000 that we have, and I'll talk a little bit more about those specific requests in a second on the next slide, but we're going to support 75,000 with ESSER and 62,000 with school choice. That still leaves a lot of requests that are valuable that we are not able to build in at this point in our process. So what did we build in? So we built in a teacher at the Quinn School. We had a situation where you'll have some more information in your budget books when I send them to you. But our enrollment at the Quinn School was problematic. We were going to be up to 27 kids in a grade level and in each class on average. And that was really inconsistent with what we're trying to do for kids and inconsistent with what the other schools look like. And so at this point, we've included a new teacher in our recommendations. So you may know the next one. You may know that our Tracy Oliveira will be retiring in September, mid-September. So we are including in this proposal a director of teaching and learning focused on the needs of, specifically on the needs of the elementary level. So we've identified some thoughts about how that would work and how it would allow someone to really focus on the needs of the 4 elementary schools, and that we think that would be beneficial to students at that level. And then one director dedicated to the secondary level. So really bridging the gap between the high school and the middle school, focusing on the transition between high school and middle school, and really attempting to meet their needs. And then those 2 folks working together, obviously, to make sure district-wide we had a good transition from elementary to middle school and so forth. So there's a lot of work to be done, and this would allow us to do that in what we think is a more thoughtful way moving forward. And then the third proposal yep.
Can I ask a question about that 108 number that you have on that
Oh,
line?
yeah, sure.
Right. So is it, help me understand, is that the full cost of 2 people? Or is that 2 people starting when Tracy retires? Because it's not in sync with the fiscal year, right? So I just want to know, are we going to have higher costs on that in the year after? How does that work?
Okay, so let me explain to you where we are right now. So our budget proposal last year, so let me back up. So the assistant superintendent, Michelle Roy, retired in December 2020. In the budget proposal for fiscal year 22, we presented a replacement of the assistant superintendent position. We never replaced that position. But in that process, we had eliminated the funding for the director of teaching and learning position. So we only had one position at that time. We had the assistant superintendent position funded. Now, as of right now, we have a director of teaching and learning. So that 108,000 is the difference between what we currently have built in the fiscal year 22 budget and what it would cost to have the 2 director positions in the FY23 budget. Now, those positions are offset. They currently are in the budget, offset by some grant funding, particularly Title I being the largest amount. But that would continue with these new positions. So there's really no impact there. So that 108,000 would fund an extra position, a new position for next year. I would not necessarily anticipate an FY24 increase beyond what you would normally, whatever salary increase.
Are we going to overlap these people such they start at the beginning of the fiscal year and they'll overlap with Ms. Oliveira a couple months for training, or at least July and August? Is that the plan? So it's these 2 positions. We'll actually have 3 positions for 2 months. Do you know what I'm saying? Or are we just going to have 2 people and they're going to start in September?
Dr. Gifford, do you want to jump in on that?
I think that our plan would be to have them start just like any other administrative position, which starts in sometime in the summer. We haven't really talked about the days. And as you know, some directors have various days to their contract. So we haven't gotten into that depth yet, but we obviously would want the people to come on board earlier than Tracy leaving, just to get a.
I'm just trying to figure out what the numbers mean in that 108 contacts. If it's 3 people for 2 months, and then 2 people for the rest of the year, or what? That's just why I'm asking.
Right, and depending on when we choose to do that, could have some impact, obviously, on the financial side of it. So the third request that we have there is for an RBT. An RBT is a registered behavior technician. So they are members of our teacher assistant group, and they provide direct services to students, behavioral services. So this proposal is actually not just one staff member. This is to hire 1 staff member to meet needs that we currently have. So we have the needs now. We are spending money to provide the services, but we think it would be best to hire a staff member to provide the services rather than contract out services. So we'd be doing that with the hiring of that 1 position. And also, we're in the process we have sought volunteers to train existing staff to provide RBT services. So we'd be providing them with training, they'd get the credentials, and they'd be available to us, and it would provide some more flexibility as those services become necessary for students in their IEPs. it would really be a more robust model than what we have now. And right now we're stringing it together, but this would be a much better way to provide continuity and offer those services to students. So I talked a little bit about the school committee. So the school committee, we'd be coming up with on the 14th. We'll have a presentation for the school committee. We will have a school committee meeting. We will have a couple of school committee meetings where we can work through the budget, talk about the things that that we've proposed, the things we haven't proposed, and other topics as they come up and develop with funding and with the state funding and so forth. We then would have the public hearing for the budget on March 21st. Sometime in that mix, we'll meet with the finance committee. I'm not exactly sure when that would be. Sometimes that's before the school committee approves the budget. Sometimes it probably will be before then, I would guess. But we'll also meet with the selectmen and hopefully, get recommendations for town meeting from those bodies. School committee approval right now, tentatively scheduled for April 4th. Obviously, this can all be flexible to an extent, although we do need to get to be done with this process, at least in terms of an initial budget vote by the school committee, so that we can get it on the warrant in time for the town meeting, which is on June 7th. So we do have some flexibility. We have lots of opportunity to talk about this. And basically, that concludes the presentation part of this. I'd be happy to answer questions, talk a little more about specifics about this, if anyone has anything they'd like to add.
So I'll keep talking. Sorry. I don't know if others want to add, but from my time on the finance committee, I've developed a real aversion to using one-time funds for recurring expenses. And I know that some of these things we need to do. I think we need to have a conversation, like at what point does school choice become a recurring revenue? We've had it in place for how many years now? So maybe I'm a little less worried about that. We have a healthy balance in that account where we could ride it out for several years, such that if we put $62,000 on it this year and school choice went away, we wouldn't have to come up with the full 62 right away. I am deeply concerned about the fiscal cliff that the ESSER grants really represent. And I know these are things that we need to do. I mean, we can see it on the news about the emotional challenges that our students are facing right now. I'm just, it worries me about, where we're going to be 2 to 3 years from now. And I think we need to have these conversations about, deeply about what we're putting on ESSER funding, and to develop a plan such that we don't all of a sudden have to lay off a bunch of people who we've come to depend on because the town doesn't have the money for that. So I'm really a little bit nervous about, $138,000 going on non-recurring revenue just here. I think we already have some stuff that's on ESSER. And I think we need to, have some conversations about how we're going to plan for a soft landing. I'm really worried about that.
You're right to be worried about it. We are very worried about it. I think all school districts are very worried about it. And the reality is that there is no way to not have some degree of fiscal cliff. The intent of these funds was to support students by hiring staff. You can run after school programs, which you may not run 3 years from now, sure, but that is minor. And they've come out with additional grants that have helped us do that. So that the problem is that we've been provided with millions of dollars. That's a great problem to have. And we are attempting to address those needs, which are absolutely real. We're well aware that kids need more help now than they've ever needed. And we're trying to provide that help, but it will come to an end. And there is no source of revenue once you get past this. That I would be very surprised if there is a federal source of revenue that continues this at the end to any large degree. So what we've been talking about internally is, okay, how do we adjust staffing and sort of wean off it? But it's hard to do. And, when you have a budget proposal that's already fairly substantial, it's not like you can build those positions into that easily. So you have to look at things like attrition, and it's just not going to be it's not going to be easy to do. It's going to be very difficult.
Can I just make maybe perhaps one recommendation as we look towards the future, right? Particularly where we're using this money to hire. I think it would be good for us to be very careful in documenting sort of what these people are doing. So if they're, doing, community outreach as a social worker, like how many people are they visiting? How many kids have they gotten back in? Because I think part of it is we're going to have to make a case for continuing these positions. So to the extent we can document real needs that have been addressed, it's sometimes pretty, opaque here, for the community. What does an outreach social worker do? Well, they make sure the kids are in school, and this is how many kids they contacted, and this is how many times they connected them to these services. I think that may help us because, ultimately, I think you're right, Mr. Kiley. We can't look to the federal government. I don't think we're going to be able to look to the state government to save us from that. And so it's going to probably have to be on us. And so from the school side, I think we need to be prepared to make the case as to what benefit these positions offer and why we need to figure out how to fund them. So to the extent that we can document that or just track that now, I think that would be useful.
I agree. Do other folks have comments, questions, thoughts? Okay. Well, I appreciate you all attending. Again, this is our first budget subcommittee meeting. Depending on how things go, we could have other budget subcommittee meetings. We certainly will have lots of whole school committee discussion about the budget starting on the 14th. So I appreciate your time and coming and talking to us about this and considering our requests, and hopefully we can move forward and with some support for what we need for kids. So thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you, Mr. Kiley.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Parati, has the video stream ended?